早晨各位同事。
Good morning, members. This is a meeting of the Subcommittee on Retirement Protection. Thank you for coming to our meeting on a Saturday. Today, we are going to have a discussion on the financial arrangements for retirement protection. The government's position is that they are not going to do it because of sustainability problems. Members of this subcommittee are very concerned about this. We would like to offer our views. Today we have invited academics and some deputations to join us in a discussion of the ideas on sustainability, and we would like the government to listen to public opinions and so that we can fight for the retirement protection we aspire to get. Please invite the deputations to come in.
其實可以講埋下一次，你唔好留到other business。好，咁啊，趁啲團體代表入緊嚟嘅時候咧，各位。
While the deputations are coming in, I have a question for members, or maybe I can give you a heads up. The next meeting will be held on the 13th of June at 2:30 p.m. And the discussion will be on the final proposal to cancel the offsetting mechanism for MPF. Any objection? Well, we invite deputations. Okay. I ask the Secretariat to upload the invitation to our website. All right. All our deputations have been seated. As a matter of routine reminder, I have to inform all deputations that you are not protected or covered by the immunities of the Electrical Powers and Privileges Ordinance, CAP 382. Likewise, your submissions are also not covered. We haven't received many written submissions. If after you have spoken, you wish to give us a written submission, please do so. Please also pay attention to the notice to deputations table for your information. Please tune in the channel you need. 0 is floor, 1 Cantonese, 2 English, 3 普通话. To facilitate interpretation, please don't speak in mixed code. Every individual or deputation will be given 5 minutes to speak. We can now start. First, Mr. Tan Ka-Piu from Hong Kong FTU. Well, I want to divide my speech in 2 parts in the 5 minutes allowed. First, I want to talk about the financial arrangements for universal retirement protection. And secondly, I want to talk about the government's proposal to deal with MPF contributions. When you have your next meeting, there may be some progress on the part of the Labour Advisory Board. So I will be talking about that as a member of LAB. Now that a higher tier of OALA is going to be introduced, $3,435, has the government looked into financial implications? The government is rich, it can certainly cope. And also, if there are contributions involved, then people will think this as of right, that they would be able to get some retirement protection instead of thinking that, well, I'm not poor enough to receive CSSA and therefore I'm on OALA. So we would like the government to introduce some element of tripartite contribution. And at present, the asset limit is very limited, for 144,000 for Singleton. 3435 seems attractive. I told the person who asked this question that there are two tiers, 2,400 and 3,445, and he said he would apply for a higher tier. And then I asked, what about your financial conditions? He said, I would take care of those. So you understand what would happen, because we are talking about people about to retire. So we should not do something out of good intention which backfire. I think the government can work something out with the academics and relevant stakeholders. I hope some senior officials would remain in the next government. I hope you will not regard this higher tier allowance as a solution for universal retirement protection. And we don't know how the funds are to be obtained or to be provided, or the lands fund, or an additional 1 or 2% of corporate profits tax. So we haven't changed in those respects. The paper also talks a lot about MPF and government's commitments. The labor sector or ordinary people are saying that this is very complicated. Sometimes you talk about a big pool of money, and then you talk about 1/3 of the share or half of the share. First, we would like to get a solution once and for all, and secondly, we want to maintain the long service payment and service payment as they are. If the factor is changed from 2/3 from 50% to 2/3, then we can achieve this. If you top up the 16.7%, if you change the factor from half to 2/3, how much money will be required? Maybe 5 billion will be sufficient. So that's one way out. Secondly, if we are sympathetic about the difficulties faced by the business sector, then the additional contribution can be put in a pool so as to shoulder the burden. And the burden is quite big, $5 billion a year. And the revenue and tax foregone for 20 years is far less. So we have to make the best use of the money available to get a solution. The government should solve this problem once and for all for June, and that would be indeed very good for the community. Next, Dr. Yang Wei-man from Xi'an University. We are talking about financial arrangement for universal retirement protection. But before I do talk about that, I want to mention 2 points. First, in different countries with different conditions, they are all facing crisis in respect of their retirement protection system because of the life expectancy growth. According to a UN report on aging population, in 7 or 8 years, the life expectancy would increase by 1 year, and then every 8 to 9 years by 2 years. According to this UN report, this trend is still continuing. By 2050, the average life expectancy will be something like 89 years. And with a lower birth rate and fewer children born, and the slow growth in wages and fragmentation of employment, different regions and countries are all facing the crisis of the retirement protection system being bankrupted. As I've said on various occasions, universal retirement protection can lead to the provision of subsidy by the less rich to the more rich, and that is very unreasonable, unfair. So therefore, I have the following suggestions to make here. First, I'm not against. I'm not in favor of transferring the 2.5% of MPF contributions to the pool for universal retirement protection, because that will undermine the other pillars of retirement protection. And I think neither the employer nor the employee nor corporation should be asked to contribute, because that may lead to a situation whereby the poor will subsidize the rich. On the question of expenditure to run such a system, I would advocate that the government shoulder the full cost. And then for the old age allowance, as Professor Chow's report said, should be raised to $3,000 from $1,235.
So I suggest that we should add to around 50 billion. So, and then each year we should put into the universal protection more investment. So it would be around $15.7 billion, and then we should go towards the 10 million profit to seek for tax. And Professor Chow in December of 2015 amended it and added in the means test that for 5 million of cash flow, I suggested for people with over 10 million cash flow, then they would not be able to be eligible for the protection plan, and that would be around 90% of the people. If we want to have a means test of 10 million, that means that people would have to declare their assets. We also agree with what Professor Chow said. Starting from the age of 70, you'll be able to receive the universal retirement protection, and that it should be linked with expected life expectancy. So the age of receiving the protection may be delayed. Well, if we can only receive it at 70, then I think the CSSA should remain at 60 or 65 to help with the elderly who need it. Because if we have to maintain it at 65 years old, then we would also need those receiving CSSA to also to benefit from the universal retirement protection. So for those with 10 million assets, and we can consider actually also putting a limit for those with 2 properties or more, that they would not be eligible for the retirement protection plan. Can I have a couple more minutes, Chairman? The last point is quite important. I hope the government will also think of a backup plan, that in the case of insufficient funds, there would be a backup plan on how to resolve this issue. I have 3 suggestions. So when we're not able to support it, then we could suggest delaying the time of giving out the allowance, and then we should also look into the issue. If there is a problem, then we could perhaps charge tax for that, and we should and I could elaborate more if you have questions later, because that could really help us to reduce stress on society. Thank you. Next, we have from Hong Kong Shiyuan University, Professor Poon. Thank you, Chairman. The universal retirement protection has been in place in Germany for many years. It could help alleviate poverty. I'm sure you all understand this point very well. Another objective is to redistribute income. Let's say a very wealthy person such as Mr. Li Ka-shing, if you give him $100, he won't need to use it, or he might only use $1. But for a very poor person, if you give him $100, then he will need to use up the entire lump sum. So this is what I mean by income redistribution. A lot of people agree that we should reach objectives in retirement plan is that to alleviate poverty and to redistribute income. We have seen that many countries are now starting to fear problems caused by retirement. This has been the case in Taiwan and many other countries. Professor Young just now suggested extending or delaying the age of retirement, or try to reduce the benefits, or maybe to add on tax. But this would only bring a long rally and protests, and that would be very difficult for us to really launch these plans. We do not want this to happen. All around the world, we see fear of retirement protection plans. Recently in Hong Kong, we've heard that we have an increase in our budget reserves, over 100 billion. So 100 million is 100 times a million. So that means we are very wealthy. We could also note the discrepancies between the rich and poor. We have something called the Gini coefficient. Of course, there would be different numbers from different estimates. But I think that what is given to us by the Census and Statistics Department should be more accurate. Hong Kong, we're talking about the number should be 0.53. And for some countries, the Gini coefficient is up to 0.6 or 0.7. But if we look at all the developed countries such as the US, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong has a very high coefficient. We are all developing, and we are absurdly high. So this reminds us that there is something to be done, and we have actually seen this phenomena a few years back. Well, I like to call this old age allowance and not retirement protection, because if I haven't worked before, then why should it be called retirement protection? Because I think that it should just be called an elderly supplement. We have many housewives in Hong Kong, and also people with disabilities, and we need to include them as well. Therefore, if we are to adopt the universal retirement plan, we should try to reform it, or we could try to enhance it. We should be more daring and try to launch a reform. In 2005, the United Nations stated the 5 pillars we in Hong Kong are doing well in 4 pillars. The second pillar is mandatory retirement protection, but it should be public funded, and we lack this pillar. Well, if we think that this is worth it and we're able to do it, then I'm very happy to carry this forward. I'm sorry, I'll just need a couple more seconds. I have submitted my paper to a journal, and it's estimated that a recent graduate with an income of $15,000 working all the way to retirement, let's say you need to contribute 5%, and let's not look into inflation, then we can see that by the time he retires, this person will be able to get 3,648. But this does not include housewives and people with disabilities. And if this is a protection for all, then the government would need to fund it, and that would take up 0.13% of the GDP, and by 2064 it will be 0.63%. And the government right now supporting CSSA and others, and allowances is around 0.2%. The OECD states that India accounts for around 10% of GDP. So for Hong Kong, we're talking only about 3%. It's really not too much when compared to other countries in the world. Thank you, Professor Poon. Next, we have from Hong Kong Shuyuan University, Dr. Yun Wai Kei. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. I've read the report, and I do agree the government strengthening the pillars. But we're talking about the concept of universal retirement plan. I'm afraid that under the multi-pillar system, we might not be able to include all those who need help or all the elderly in society. So after reading this report, I do have a few comments to make. First of all, to include everyone or all the elderly, we could enhance the old age allowance because part of it needs to go through a means test. If we don't need a means test and everyone would be able to collect the old age allowance, that would cover basically all those who are 65 or older. However, I think that people are worried about the financial burden on Hong Kong. We have over 10 million. We have around we have many elderly people now, and I'm sure that it would reach 1 million or 2 million in a couple of years. If you give $1,000 more to each elderly person, let's say it's only 10,000 elderly. If everybody uses $100 more, that's already like 100 million, and that would mean that you would need to spend much more in a year, and that would partly actually alleviate the financial burden if you don't do so. However, if you're too tight on money and if you're too worried about the financial burden, then you're not going to do anything. Well, the money is to be spent anyways. The difference lies in whether the society is going to use it or whether the government is going to use it. Well, from baby boom to now, we are all going through aging population right now. If we can boost economic development, then the financial burden would not be so heavy. I hope that when possible, we should try to reduce the stress on employers as well on the MPF, because both employer and employee need to contribute right now. From the perspective of employer, they think that they have a very heavy burden. For employees, they think that it's unfair. We're talking about 10-year period. If the government can take up 70 or 80%, then the burden on the employers would be less. Recently, we have looked into the public annuity report. This is actually opposite from the MPF. We have adopted the MTF scheme for over 10 years, and many people already have collected some money. And when retirement comes, we could suggest that this money be put into the public annuity, and then you would be able to use the money as needed. Most employees own an MPF account right now, so I think that it is quite useful. I don't think we should set a limit on the public annuity. Right now, the ceiling is 1 million. And I don't think there should be a limit on participants, so that there could be a larger coverage. If everybody pays 1 million, that's not at all, but that's not a lot. But for MPF, you can see that a lot of people are in the scheme, and you will be able to cover more people. So you could set the limit at around 500,000 or 1 million, and then you would be able to have a larger coverage.
And the coverage is more or less like universal. Next, Professor Choi Ka-Kin from Clemson University. Good morning, I'm Choi Ka-Kin. I'm an economics professor. My expertise is in economic analysis. In respect of Professor Nelson Chan's report on the financial arrangements for universal retirement protection, I've done some analysis which I can share with you now. First of all, let's look at what an old age pension is about. We start with the government option of irrespective of financial position. And then there will be two adjustments in line with life expectancy. And then there are some restrictions. Residents in Hong Kong, a high asset limit, $5 million or more. And only 90% of eligible elderly person would claim the pension. And then I use the government consultation documents data to look into this quasi-universal and what would be the total cost in 50 years. It would be 1.365 trillion. It's $1 trillion less than the government's projection of $2.39 trillion. Where can we get the 1.365 trillion dollars? There's a few possibilities, a few options. 3 suggestions here. First, a one-off injection. We need a $650 billion, and then an annual return rate 3%, and that would sustain the system for 50 years. Second, a suggestion: if we don't have that much in one injection, let's have $100 billion. And then annually, $20.9 billion. Again, the return rate is presumed to be 3%. And again, that would be sufficient for 50 years. And then the third option, no one-off injection, and an injection will be made annually. We need to do it $24.6 billion every year, and the return rate is 3%. And again, that would be sufficient for the system to run 50 years. So this is a quasi-retirement protection scheme, which is similar to the OAA system. But there are two major differences. First, in the government consultation document, the $60,000 asset test, there will be a high administrative cost to guard against abuse because of fluctuation, the value of stocks, or whether the elderly persons would transfer their assets to their sons and relatives. So we should have a high asset limit, $5 million. That it would be very difficult to do with such a big sum by transferring assets, and then there would also be less distortion of consumption behavior, and also the eligibility age will be linked to the life expectancy. That would be very good in controlling costs. And secondly, we should have a so-called longevity protection. Recently, the government is becoming aware of the need for longevity insurance. The public annuity scheme to be introduced is to provide some insurance coverage for elderly persons, so that they will not be out of means, they will not be financially deprived when they live longer. But if you want to get, say, $3,000 out of the annuity scheme, how much do you need? You need to put $500,000 into an account kept by the government. But elderly persons may need to see doctors, and they may want to have some contingency funds. So if you want to get $3,000 or so from an annuity, but they are not eligible for OALA because they have got a few hundreds of thousands of dollars in their accounts. So what should they do? Well, I hope the government would seriously consider the situation of this group of elderly persons, so that the government should consider whether Professor Chow's proposal to have a OH pension scheme should be implemented. Next, we have Professor Wong Hung from CUHK. Chairman, good morning. I wear two hats. I want to present the academics proposal, and I also have a 2064 proposal on behalf of a concerned group. I've talked about this proposal a number of times in this council. I won't repeat the same today. Today, I would like to concentrate on financial arrangements. I would like to put some questions to the government, and then I will also compare the 2064 proposal with the improved OALA's system in terms of financial arrangements and the pros and cons of the two. I will make comparison in three areas. First, sustainability, viability, and the social effects. I would be assessing the financial arrangements for the two different systems. On sustainability, the government has been asking this question all the time. That is, it may be very costly to run a retirement protection scheme, universal retirement scheme, therefore it's not viable. But this is not a pay-as-you-go scheme. It's a partially pre-funded scheme. So while Hong Kong is not aging to the extreme, we should do it. Well, it's not like the pay-as-you-go system in other countries, because they have to pay the scheme as they go along. An aging population is not a is not a downside as long as we can calculate the sums correctly. Under our calculation, the government will only show the 50% of the cost. Another 30% will be from MPF contributions of employers and employees, something that they are already doing. There will be no additional financial burden for them. But the only new element is that an additional 1.9% in profit tax for the corporations earning having a profit of more than $10 million. So employers and employees, 30% additional profits tax and return 20% and 50% from the government. The government's calculations is on the basis of 100% contributions from the government. So we'd like the government to calculate the costs required up to 2064, because that's the base period for all calculations. If there's a need to increase taxes, then what taxes will be increased? We'd like to hear from the government. For this 50-30-20 share, even if we need to increase taxes, perhaps the government can consider how it can do. This is a shared responsibility scheme. The employers and the employees are responsible for the contributions. So they will not be asking for higher payout because the burden is on them. So that would ensure better sustainability. At first, we wanted the government to provide the seed money of $50 billion, which sounds big. 10 years ago, we didn't have that because we have dragged our feet for so long, and now the government will need to make an investment, a one-off investment. The government has earmarked a sum of $50 billion, but we don't see how this seed money is going to be spent, whether it's going to be spent on the new OALA scheme or in the MPF offsetting arrangement. So we'd like to learn from the government whether the $50 billion will be exhausted. If that's the case, it's really regrettable because it should be reserved for a universal retirement protection scheme or a government-run protection scheme. And if you go use it, you should not use it on the OALA or other arrangements. Next, on viability. In 2016, according to a poll by PolyU, 63.7% of respondents supported a universal scheme, not a means test scheme. And then the third point, social effect. If the financial arrangements involve a tripartite contribution, the moral hazard is at a low level, and the government's proposal incurs the highest moral hazards because there will be a transfer of assets to elderly persons, sons, and so the moral hazard for transferring assets will be high. And if we give the money to the elderly persons now, they would be able to spend the money that would give them an ease of mind, that they would have basic living standards that would also stimulate local spending and economy. Next, Mr. Lee Kim Ming from CTU. I'm a sociology academic. Financial arrangements are not just for economics. They also carry social significance. It's an important factor for Hong Kong now. The SAR and the CE-elect want to have community conciliation. Then I think we need to look at the social sociological significance of different financial arrangements. Some academics have referred to overseas experience and problems with aging population. First of all, some have quoted the example of Greece, but the biggest problem lies with the civil service, not their retirement protection system. And they have also a problem of tax evasion. There's a problem with design. If the universal retirement protection system is well designed, then such problems can be avoided. Some academics have asked whether we should go for a reform or some enhancement if we adopt the so-called incremental approach. Then can the enhancements really resolve the social political problems of Hong Kong? We have different aims to achieve. For income protection, some have mentioned poverty alleviation among them. I'm one of the advocates of the 2064 proposal. I will say this is not a poverty alleviation initiative. We have CSSA. That's a separate pillar. It may serve some effect in poverty alleviation, but that's not the main aim. And some people have talked about, some academics have talked about income smoothing. That is, we contribute while we have a higher income. And also, we pay people a pension in recognition of their past contribution to our community.
Especially for the people for people right now, the old people right now, well, according to the 2064 scheme, then they wouldn't have to contribute, but we are still offering them with protection, because we want to recognize their contributions to the economic development in Hong Kong. Some academics just now have mentioned that we now have a low birth rate in Hong Kong. So would the people in future still have children to take care of them? When you start to save up, then there might be income smoothing. So actually, a retirement plan from the government can really help us to resolve issues in the future. We always scare the young people by saying that we don't have enough money, but from the surveys we could see that young people also support such a scheme. So you can see that there is a sort of solidarity in the different generations. A scheme in place right now could help the elderly right now. That means that the young people right now recognize the past contributions of the elderly in the past. We're just trying to repay the elderly out of respect. Would the government have to pay it all? Well, of course, that would be a good idea, because many people would not need to contribute, but that would lose our social significance. We also need to contribute, because what we are contributing is of value. It's just like getting a birthday present. When you give a birthday present to someone, the present may not mean a great deal, but there's a sort of significance in it. So there should be a tripartite contribution that each side would need to pay, and that would lead to solidarity in Hong Kong. We need to pay 1.9% of profit tax. even Mr. Li Ka-shing said that that more taxes should be paid because many people say that the government and the business sector is working together to get even more profit. We want to show everyone that we are loyal to Hong Kong. So let's not talk about CSR here. Let's just talk about trying to give some sort of social meaning for this scheme. So if you look at it from the perspective of sustainability, we need to consider which technical scheme is much better. All funding sources are meaningful. The Hong Kong government always insists that we suffer from financial deficit. But our elect chief executive said that there should be progressive profit tax. So that actually means a reduction in taxes. So that's quite a conflict. Why do you have to say that we do have a financial pressure, yet you want to reduce taxes? So please don't lie to us. Show us instead. Show us. The 2064 scheme is sustainable, and we need to consider all the funding sources, whether these could all be of value to society, and to see whether these could really help Hong Kong. Thank you. Next, we have Professor Wong Yu Chung from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Thank you, Chairman. After many years of discussions, the Universal Retirement Protection Plan has been vetoed by the government. Only 40% of the elderly can receive $3,400 of CSSA or the OALA. And so you can see that there is still a huge discrepancy between what is given and what is needed. And 20% of them would get around $2,000 of old age allowance. For the more wealthy elderly, of course, they would not receive any allowance, but then even if you consider like that, there are still 20% of the elderly who could not get anything. They could only get their old age allowance or supplement after 70 years old. And so these people are very unsatisfied with the government. The retirement protection plan, in accordance with the policy address, said that there would be around 9 billion extra funding for that in the next 10 years, and for those 65 to 69, they would be able to receive some sort of supplement. So in the paper, we see that the government, for the first time, accumulated the overall expenses to look into the contributions from the government. So from now to 2064, the government would give around 2.4 trillion altogether, and if they want to sustain this scheme, then you will need to increase the profit tax to 4.2%. If not, then the income tax would need to be raised to 8.3%. And if you don't do that, then we need to charge VAT. And this is the first time that the government has analyzed the taxes this way. So let me try to also understand it from the government's perspective to see whether we would be able to sustain it from the budget. So let's take a look at the 2017 prices. For the first year, they would need to use 60-odd billion, and then with the increasing population, then on average every year we will need to spend 12 billion more. And from 2017 to 2064, the extra expenses would be around 560 billion. So that's around half of the budget surplus. And then if you also estimate the taxes to pay for this, then then the year 2017, they will need to increase profit tax by 1%. If not, then the income tax would also need to raise 2%. If you do not do neither, then we will need to start with the VAT percent by 1%. So the NGOs have recommended a plan which is supported by the 60% of the people. The government has not, but the NGOs have not really talked about how you can really sustain it, and the government has not made any recommendations on this. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Chan Hock Fong. Well, I would first defer to my colleague, Mr. Lau Chuk K first. Well, ever since we have started our alliance on fighting for universal retirement protection, we have written up many reports and submitted to the government. But it seems like we have all dumped this down the drain because the government has not made any responses. It's only until last year, 2016, that the government did 2 consultant studies, and together with Professor Chow Wing-sun came up with a conclusion by this booklet. This is called the Vision and Long-Term Plan for retirement protection in the future. So after many studies made by the government believes that there should not be a universal retirement protection scheme. The reason being that universal plan would not be able to sustain, and overseas experience shows that this would not be sustainable in the long term, and that's very detrimental to Hong Kong with a huge financial pressure. Oh, I want to show this booklet to all of you. This is the first time the government has used something in black and white to veto the universal retirement plan. But the conclusions made by this report and Professor Chow Wing-sun's report is totally opposite. Professor Chow's report suggested launching an universal retirement protection plan, and for the government's individual report launched in 2016, it clearly shows that although most of the people in Hong Kong support universal plan, the government itself, after reviewing these reports, came to the conclusion that came to opposite conclusion. So much money has been spent on conducting research, but the government did not pay attention to it. Instead, it just came up with its own conclusion, and this is exactly opposite from what C.Y. Leung has promised in his election platform a few years ago. Mr. C.Y. Leung said he did not commit to the universal retirement protection plan, but that's not true. In 2014, in a forum before the elections, conducted by HKCSS, he at that time said that it should be done, and a few hundred people were present that time. But now he denied having said anything like that. Well, let's put this aside first, but let's look at the platform given by C.Y. Leung in his election. On page 33 of his platform, he committed a old age fund. We still have a few months left. Maybe Secretary Siu or their colleagues from the for the administration's private office can tell us where the old age fund has gone to. In 2015, 550 billion was suggested to be used for old age allowance, and this was something that we have advocated for a long time, that it should be a launching fund for universal retirement protection plan, showing the commitment of the government. However, today we found that this 50 billion was not used for universal retirement protection. Instead, it was put in the higher allowance for the OALA, and maybe this has already been put in recurrent expenses. We are now talking about the hedging issue. Maybe that would also be included in that. My colleague, Mr. Chen, can give you more details later. So 50 billion was used to support recurrent expenses, and that is very unreasonable. We are not objecting to enhancing old age allowance, but you could actually pay it out of your own pockets. Why do you have to use up the money committed for universal retirement protection plan? And this booklet actually comes to an opposite conclusion of what is shown. Maybe the administration can respond to it later. All right, I would also like to supplement Mr. Lau. This year's budget shows around over $100 billion, $100 billion in surplus, and 1 year surplus already is able to support the next 50 years of universal protection plan. We're not using the pay-as-you-go scheme. I hope that the government will continue talking about this. And then we have 5 main requests.
The government keeps emphasizing the multi-pillar approach of the World Bank. The government has ignored pillar number 1. We want to implement pillar number 1. Second, in C.Y. Leung's manifesto, a promise was made to set up a fund for old age support. So this promise must be kept. We'll ask the government to use the $50 billion as the launching money of the universal retirement protection, and the money should be increased to $100 billion. And also the government should announce the expenditure on all the welfare allowances in the coming 50 years. And then the government is going to should set up a subcommittee on tax reform. Mrs. Carrie Lam is going to be the new CE. Mr. Lee Ka-sing says Mrs. Carrie Lam is the legendary Lu Wah, and we hope that he would amend the sky as in the legend, and then she would implement the tripartite universal retirement protection system as suggested. Next we have Mr. Mok Tai Kei from the Institute of Social Protection. Good morning. We have submitted 3 papers of my institute on financial arrangements to provide different perspectives on the financial analysis. In short, my institute support the proposal from 180 academics, and we're also in support of the community proposal, that is the 2064 proposal. We have conducted some academic analysis, and we will say that the financial arrangement proposed in that scheme will be very conservative, because the assumption is that in the coming 5 years, all the way to 2064, for Hong Kong, the economic growth is 0. That is to say, wages will see no real growth. It will just be in line with inflation. wage increase will be offset by the inflation, so the contribution will be lower than expected. And secondly, they suggest that or they presume that the profits of corporations earning more than $10 million in profit will not have any profit growth. So it's for the 50 years, it's a $33 billion of contribution from both the employers and the employees. But we know that the economy that will grow and the wages will have real growth. So if there's just a little bit of real growth, the projected figures will be much better. Secondly, they are relying on the Census and Statistics Department's population projection for the 50 years. This is a very conservative projection. And under such conservative assumptions, in the year 2064, there will still be a surplus of $160 billion. So, if in the period we have some real growth in our economy or some real growth in wages, the surplus of $160 billion would be much higher than what they suggest now. So even without any other supplementary arrangement, the financial viability can be ensured. In 2015, when the Census and Statistics Department announced the census data, we want them to present the assumptions to this council again. Because in the CNS department's own survey forms or own findings from 2004 to 2014, the birth rate has increased from 922 per 1,000 couples to 1,234. So they have not explained why the birth rate would drop again all the way to 2064. Even if this is borne out to be the case, according to the 2064 proposal, there will still be a surplus of $160 billion. According to the census last year, if we project and forward for another 50 years, we believe the ultimate position will be much better than what we anticipate now. In our papers, we also set out 15 parameters for the government and the community to adopt so as to further boost the $160 billion of surplus at the end of the period. I'll just mention 4 of them. First, in Professor Nelson Chan's report, it's been pointed out that the OAA has this feature all along. More than 10% of the eligible claimants did not come forward. So we can be quite sure that the come forward rate for this new universal protection scheme will not have a 100% take-up rate. And by deferring the retirement age, there will be another additional 5 years of contributions, and that would improve the financial viability, and the ultimate surplus will be bigger. And then if the age of claiming the retirement pension is deferred by 2 years, the projected surplus of $160 billion will also go up. I won't go into the details of the other parameters which are in our papers. We can provide the information for your reference. All these changes to the parameters can further increase the projected surplus of this universal scheme. Mr. Wong Yong-tat, today we're talking about financial arrangements. So I would like to say something in particular of the neighborhood worker centers views. We support the joint concern group of universal retirement protection proposal, but we have our own proposal to make. We want to abolish the MPF, and we should introduce a universal retirement protection scheme. We want to have a universal system covering everyone over the age of 65 in Hong Kong. Second, it should be able to sustain a adequate living standard. So we're talking about an amount of $3,500 and $4,000 a month. And at the same time, the government should commit more in suitably committed in healthcare and other areas of welfare. And let's look at the sustainability of our scheme. First, the government should set up a seed money fund with $200 billion. And where does the $200 billion come from? Well, it should be funded by by our budgets. The surplus the surplus over the years was something like $30 billion to $100 billion. If the surplus for 5 years is invested into a seed money fund, then it will be $200 billion. So there will be no need to provide tax rebates. So we should make the best use of our fiscal surplus, put it in a seed money fund. Secondly, on contributions, we want to have a tripartite system involving employers, employees, and government, all contributing 5% of wages, which is a mirror arrangement of the MPF contribution system. And we look at the average wages of employees in 2016 is $15,500. That's disregard the 500. So everyone would be the free size will contribute $750 each. So every month, the total contribution is $2,250. In 2046, when the population peak, 1 in 4 will be a child. At that time, 1 in 4 will be over 65, a retiree. So 2 working people will be supporting 1 elderly person. The contribution from the 2 will be $4,500. And they will be supporting an elderly person who gets $3,500 to $4,000. That should be sufficient. And on top, we have the seed money of $200 billion from the government. So even at the peak of the population curve, there will be sufficient money to cope with the expenditure. And we would advocate the abolition of MPF system once this is up and running. And we will have to pay attention to the contribution arrangement. There's a floor and a cap. Those earning fewer than $7,000 will not need to contribute. The current cap is $30,000. We believe more should be contributed, so the cap should be $60,000 a month. We believe that the total contribution will be higher than the current MPF contributions. the merits are that the abolition of MPF is that the contribution of employees will not be eroded by the management fees. And we believe that system can be implemented in 5 years' time, which would be good for the elderly population. And we believe that the system whereby 2 working people support 1 elderly person will be sustainable. And then the tripartite system is not complicated. It's just a replicate of the MPF system. And the government can also abolish the OALA and the OAA, and the new system will be streamlined. We believe the new system will also be adequate to protect the living standards of elderly people. We hope that it can be implemented soon. Next, Dr. Chung Kin-hwa from PolyU.
Thank you, Chairman. We're talking about funding for the retirement protection. I think I would like to take it from a few points. First of all, this involves the attitude for the elderly in this society. Many people think that aging population is a problem, but this is reality, whether we like it or not, with rising life expectancies. And of course, there would be an aging population, and we should be ready for that. The government's role is to provide a good environment for people to prepare themselves, and must also adopt some sort of policies and strategies to help the elderly age. So the government has a responsibility to prepare for providing for the elderly, and not to just come up with some sort of consultancy reports. Is the government doing well in terms of preparing for the elderly? Actually, everybody is responsible for an aging population. The society has responsibility. The government also has responsibility in setting out policies. Therefore, government planning is of utmost importance. But what has the government done so far? From the 2015 consultancy report, we can see that the government seems to evade from committing to long-term policies. And you try to smear the concept of the aging population. You don't think of it as a natural evolution of society, and not be liable for this phenomena. You do not come up with a sustainable plan, and you just try to enhance certain features here and there. That wouldn't work. You have come up with the OALA, old age allowance, and the new public annuity fund, and the silver hair bonds. You try to come up with new plans. I personally believe that yes, it is good to diversify. I teach public strategy, and I always say that any additional without affecting existing policies are welcome. But what about those without assets? Professor Wong has said that only 40% of old people are covered by the existing schemes. So how about the remaining 60%? Do you assume that they all have the capability to sustain themselves? We talk about fund arrangement today. But the old age allowance or the OALA do not really arrange funds well. You said that you would need to use 2.3 trillion by doing that. But with the OALA, you're already talking about over 20 billion. And for 10 years, that's around 50 billion. And then by 50 years, you're talking about 1 trillion. But all this money is not arranged properly. I think that's the crux of the matter. You have spent the money, yes, but if you don't try to resolve the issue of where the money is going to come from, that's going to be very problematic. The 2064 plan is to resolve the issue of funding. But the policy suggested by the government has no plans in this whatsoever. Are you going to increase taxes as suggested by the other academics right now? This is something that the government should think carefully. The World Bank suggested 5 pillars, but whatever we have discussed, it seems that we have lost the first pillar. You talk about the goddess trying to fix the sky, but we are not doing anything like that. We have worked in the second, third, fourth pillar, leaving out the first pillar. So that's an attitude problem. We do have to spend money. It might be 2 trillion, and some academics have calculated to be over 10 trillion. I don't know who is accurate. We're spending the money, but we're not resolving the matter. The government should prep itself early. I do have some expectations from the government. First of all, LegCo members should continue to support launching of the Universal Retirement Protection Plan. The government should not shirk from its responsibilities. Thirdly, according to hearsay, the government will mention this in the next policy address. I hope that you would really tell us where the money is going from in the next report, whether it be in October or February. I need to think of plans such as the 2064 plan. I think for the first policy address of the next government, you would need to tell us how you're going to go forward in the aging population society. This is not something the government should evade from anymore. NGOs will just continue to support a universal retirement protection plan. It will not stop just because the government has vetoed it. All right, we're now going to open the floor to members. Right now we have Mr. Siu Ka-chun, Dr. Fernando Chang, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, and Mr. Chen Ji-chun waiting to speak. And Mr. Poon Siu-ping. First, Mr. Siu Ka-chun. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to first declare interest. First of all, I'm also a supporter of 2064 plan, and Dr. Mok was my professor in school, and he taught me about universal protection. So I have a few questions. We have heard many academics speak today, and I now understand why the government is scared of these academics, because they are correct and they're very and they make good estimates. Why is the 2046 plan not being accepted by the government? Has Mrs. Carrie Lam discussed with Secretary Siu about it? Is it because this plan is affecting MPF, and that is why it is unacceptable? Can you tell us the reason why the 2064 scheme would not be supported? Mr. Siu, thank you. I'm not afraid of meeting with academics. We have met many times and we have made any exchanges, although our views may not be of one. We all believe that something should be done. You wonder why universal retirement protection scheme cannot be supported. You can see from the policy address and from the budget or in our little booklet that we have stated our views that we should use a multi-pronged approach to enhance our retirement protection, especially for those in need. Each elderly person needs something different. Some need allowances, some need a retirement plan, and some only need a sustainable investment plan, and some are self-sufficient. So the retirement protection plan could not be cut across the board. And retirement protection should be complementary under a multi-pillar approach. Therefore, the conclusion in our policy address suggested improvements to be made in the next few years, such as increasing the old age allowance, and in April we came up with a default MPF plan to try to hedge the issues of severance pay and a long-term service. Well, you have already talked for 30 seconds. Well, can you tell me whether this is really unacceptable for Mrs. Carrie Lam because it touched on the MPF? We have already reflected in our policy address in our booklet that we have explained our beliefs. We should continue with the multi-pillar approach to complement other pillars. We really must spend the money on those people in need. I'm sure that has been explained very clearly in the policy address. I believe that I have mentioned this on many occasions. We are in doubt of a couple of points because the MPF pillar would be undermined. It should continue to mature, continue to develop. There are actually many technical issues. Right now, this is a personal contribution. But if we are to make changes, does it mean that it might lead to changes in tax? Well, all right, I will follow up on more questions. Thank you. Well, we have to see whether there is time for a second round. Dr. Fernando Chang, please. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Siu's declaration can also be applied to me. I'm also an advocate for 2064 plan, and Mr. Henry Mock was also one of my professors before. This really shows the failure of Hong Kong's government structure and management. We want to ensure that the elderly could be prepared for retirement. I remember Mr. Mock in 1997 already advocated a two-tier protection plan, and you also put down my name on the plan that time. The FTU has also supported this idea. Many NGOs work together to come up with some sort of universal plan, and then the academics enhanced it recently to become the 2064 scheme. Calculations have been made for the scheme with high transparency. The public understands it, but the government has never brought up any scheme except for back in the colonial days. When the SAR government took over, it kept on shelving it. I don't want to repeat the process. Now suddenly this year, an enhanced allowance was suggested with no previous consultation nor transparency. It came out of nowhere and suddenly became effective. Today, we have invited the academics and advocates to attend today's meeting to share with us once more their views. What we hear clear and loud today is that you came up with the old age allowance, and now you come up with an improvised version. Where does the money come from? Or you're talking about, fund mobilization today. Where are you going to get the money?
As Dr. Chung has said, 10, 20, 50 years later, would this go bust? If we are going to incur trillions of dollars, then where does the money come from? Mr. Matthew Chung just put it so lightheartedly that tax increase will be inevitable. For years, you have talked about community proposals as being not sustainable. Actually, we have done the actuarial assessment, and your proposal is the one which is not really sustainable. And now the current term of government has just another 3 months to go. But your proposals cannot be changed for many, many years to come. I don't know whether we'll get a chance to change it later. As the academics have said, the discussion will not stop here. So my question is, where do you get the money for this enhanced OALA system in the coming 10 to 20 years? Let me stress this point again. It's not that we have not consulted people. Over the years, there have been a lot of consultation exercises. We've talked about whether it should be something irrespective of means or whether it should be means tested. We have now come up with an enhanced option. Well, it was never announced. We only knew about it when you made the announcement in the policy address. But the community proposals have been around for discussion for many years. Well, after consultation, we need to come up with a policy decision. If the appropriation bill can be passed quickly, many elderly people would stand to benefit immediately. Dr. Zhang talked about the financial sustainability. On the basis of this enhancement, we are going to spend additionally $7.5 billion or so in the coming 10 years. Of course, it will be sustainable in the coming 10 years, but with an aging population, whether we have retirement protection or not, we need to review our tax system. The FS said on many occasions that there will be a tax policy group to review our tax system. We will look at ways to promote the development of industry so that we can create more wealth to address the question of sustainability. The opportunity will be taken to streamline our tax system, to broaden our tax base, and increase the revenue so as to fund the enhancements that we need in the coming years. The FS will then set the themes of studies for this tax policy group in due course. In the past, Mr. Siu used a plain verse in his speech because he was not dealing with policy issues. Now it's been promoted. The way he speaks, well, maybe it's of proximity to 689. It's something like sophistry. Well, I was distributing leaflets when Mr. Mo Tai Kei advocated that we should have some enhancement on top of the MPF. He was ahead of his time, and of course it was a suggestion from an academic. At the time, we had double-digit growth rate. Well, it was due to the workers' hard work back then, who are now awaiting our help. In 1981, more than 30 years ago, these people went to the mainland to work, and they were squeezed out, and then they came back. They earned a lot in their prime years. They supported their children. It was the baby boom period. These people raise our young people, our workforce. We've been saying that the workforce is our biggest asset. What can they do now that they have aged? We should pay them back. Without them, how come we are so affluent as a community? So it's not a question of financial arrangements, but a question of necessity. I don't care how you do it. Tax reform. Mr. Siu, do you collect tax on dividends? We are the only jurisdiction where we charge no tax on private equities. What about progressive profits tax? Can we have higher rates? We have a lot of rank activities in the property sector. Can we do these? I think we are talking about the same things over and over. We should have higher minimum wage so that people can afford to contribute. Some are so eager to be eligible to pay tax, but they are not in the net, in the tax net. You are saying that these people are not making big contributions. Well, they're kept out of the tax net. The economies are rubbish. Poor people are not earning good enough money. And if a person earns minimum wage or $14,000 and the spouse doesn't work, he's not eligible to pay tax. he spends everything because they are receiving low wages, paying high rentals, paying high transport fares. They are exploited by the link, and there's nothing left for them, so they can't do this. A responsible government should pay the contributions for them. There's no lack of money. Just the margin of error in the surplus is $160 billion. If you count the $50 billion you have earmarked for this. So why are we still talking about financial arrangements? Look at our Gini coefficients. All retirement protection schemes are about redistribution of wealth because what we did wrong in the previous generations, we need to redistribute wealth. And now you lock up the surplus in the future fund. FTU should look at this. Mr. John Zhang said that it may become a white elephant. What's the future fund for? You want to create another white elephant? When Mr. Moore and I were distributing leaflets, it was 1981. Those people are about to die now. They want to have a secure retirement life. Now we have a return to the countries, and it's worse than the British. What was Wong Hong doing in the FTU after graduating from CUHK? What was he doing in the FTU? Well, he expected that the community would improve. I think you are senior in age to him. And now you work for the government. And you never speak for the poor. That's infuriating. And you are not saying that it's not financial viable. Well, the poor people have given you the money. $30 billion. Where does your surplus come from? Well, Mr. Leung, if you continue like that, we are definitely not going to have a second round. I also in favor that we should consider powering back the $220 billion of future fund so that it's put in the same pool of $50 billion to improve the OALA. We have someone from the Government Economy's Office, the Financial Secretary's Office, Mr. Lee. Can you say something about financial arrangement? Well, I'm equally not satisfied. Well, this agenda is about financial arrangement for universal retirement protection. Actually, the government is not prepared to talk about this with us because there's no need for any financial arrangement because they are not in favor of any universal retirement protection. Simply, there's no need because the policy is to help those who are in need. But the people in need, in their views, will be different from our definition. They're talking about people with an asset not higher than 144,000. They don't want to do anything universal. If we just use the additional surplus, not the projected surplus, if we would use the unexpected surplus to do this, it would be sufficient. John Zhang estimated that the surplus will be $11.8 billion, and the outcome figure, as presented by Mr. Paul Chan, is $92 billion. I said it would be over $100 billion. Now it's $110 billion. So just save the money, which is more than the original estimated surplus. Just the additional bit will be sufficient. It will be very substantial. Just tens of millions of dollars. No. Sorry, it's more than 100 billion. So there's no need to worry about money. Mr. Wong, the 2064 proposal has been presented for such a long time, and you are still trying to get the government to respond to some basic issues. So was it not vetoed or rejected? Why is it that you are asking them the same questions today? I don't think they can answer this question, but perhaps I can ask a question on behalf of Professor Wong. You have earmarked $50 billion. Is the money still there, or is the money going to be spent on the offsetting mechanism or the super OALA scheme? Secretary, members, I would like the Secretary to reply. I don't need your help at this point.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Well, you are right. We've made it very clear that the government's thinking is that through a multi-pillar approach, we'll be able to make different arrangements for different elderly in need. For example, in social protection, we provide more for those in need. For the MPF pillar, we also need to make improvements. We're talking about 3 million employees being affected by it. And for the elderly who do own certain assets, we want to promote the public annuity scheme, such as the silver bonds, because we are targeting those who have different needs. We also look into the general medical situation. We have lowered the use of a medical voucher from 70 years to 65 years, and no means test will need to be conducted. We hope that through different pillars, we'll be able to provide assistance to different people. Chairman, I think Mr. Seal has gone around in circles without telling us where the 50 billion has gone. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chen. You are very clear about this. Well, do you suffer from memory loss? You can refer to the policy address and the budget. In the policy address, the 50 billion came from the government believing that there is a need to provide for the elderly after retirement, and therefore have requested the FS to earmark $50 billion. In the next 10 years, 75.5 billion will be used, and together with the medical vouchers and funding earmarked for medical assistance, we're talking about over 90 billion in the next 10 years. So that's way over the 50 billion that we have committed to. All right, so we cannot ask, right? The 50 billion has already been used. Well, yes, the budget already stated that this 50 billion has already been earmarked and used. Ms. Lau Siu Lai. Oh, thank you. Well, you really should answer the question, Mr. Chong. And because, you know, our government officials are very have perfected their ways into not answering our questions. We don't have to worry for the government about financial arrangements. As many academics said, well, each year we just give a lot of benefits to the already wealthy people, and then you always make mistakes in your estimations. So you can see that we do have a lot of money left, and so you said that this would be used for future funds. So who has a future? Our elderly and young people do not have any future. Only the property developers have any future. Our government has plenty of money. The matter is whether it is willing to commit to this responsibility. The government always always emphasizes a conciliation. But what conciliation can you get when you're not willing to talk to the elderly? Our parents have contributed hugely to society. The 2064 scheme has been discussed for a many long time. It is sustainable and the government can really support it. But the government is not willing to take this responsibility. Actually, Chairman, even if you give me 10 minutes or 5 minutes, the administration will still just take us round in circles without answering our questions. It only wants to put our money in the hands of the wealthy. The public is right upstairs. You are just giving our public funding to the wealthy people. Can you take out your conscience and to really provide for the elderly properly? An academic just now mentioned that at that time we only looked into the in Germany, the German Chancellor Bismarck actually promoted this concept. At that time, there was still a lot of fragmentation in society, and it was only because of this launch by the German Chancellor that people were able to conciliate. I think that if you really do want to try to improve society, you should do that. I don't ask for your responses because you're just not going to answer my question. I just hope that you would reconsider what you're doing and to see whether it really is for the benefit of the people of Hong Kong. I know that our colleagues wish for a second round, and our guest today might wish to speak again. Who would like to speak? Can you indicate your wish to speak now? Yes. If you would like to make a supplement, I would extend the meeting by 15 minutes, but you really need to be use well the time. More than 3 have raised their hands. Well, you can each only have 2 minutes to supplement. Mr. Chen Hock-Fong. And you turn on the microphone for him. All right, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Zhu said consultation has been done. Professor Chow's report and the independent consultants' report show that the majority of the public support the Universal Retirement Protection Scheme. They do not think that this is actually a measure to alleviate poverty. This is actually a basic arrangement. This is a basic right for everybody of Hong Kong. The 50 billion fund, I want the government to tell us which government official made this decision to earmark the 50 billion in the old age allowance and in the MPF hedging scheme. The C.Y. Leung has mentioned before that the government will provide for the elderly. Are you trying to shirk out of your responsibility and your commitment now? I would like the administration to tell us how you conduct your means test from now to 2064, what you're going to contribute. And in future, are you going to set up a cross-disciplinary discussion on retirement protection in the near future? Well, I have to reiterate that members and deputations would all have an equal 2 minutes. And then please speak now, and then I would ask the administration to respond after you have all spoken. Mr. Lau. Well, I just want to follow up on what Mr. Chen has said. Siwa Leung in his election platform committed to an universal retirement protection plan. Did he actually start working on it? Why has it disappeared? The 50 billion fund was the responsibility of which official? Did Mr. Siwa Leung make this decision, or was it another official who made the decision to just earmark it into the recurrent expenses? Please give us a clear answer. Mr. Mok Tai Kei. Thank you, Chairman. I do not want to go into details. I really support all members' views. I support it, and I really hope that the government will do something concrete and not just try to take us around in circles. Next, we have Professor Wong. We all believe that the government has enough reserves for making the fund arrangements. Academics and NGOs really hope for a co-responsibility to take up the responsibility together with the people of Hong Kong. So we did our homework. We made all the calculations. The government has never pointed out any mistakes in our calculations. The government is just vetoing us in terms of a concept, but no reasons have been given to us. The administration does not think it infeasible. It just doesn't want to support our views. And that is why we doubt the reasons behind this objection. Or maybe it is because maybe the MPF, where they're looking into the benefits of the wealthy, the management of the fund managers of the MPF schemes, and so forth. I don't understand why the administration does not support it in principle. There have been no reasons given. And you keep on saying that there is no sustainability in fund arrangement. I don't know what yardstick you are using. You should use the same yardstick to look at your own concept. Because if you don't compare the two, this is very irresponsible. You just tell us what you're doing for the next 10 years, and then you're just going to decide what you're going to do after the first 10 years. That's very irresponsible. Next, Mr. Lee. We need to help those in need and work on all the multi-pillars. But basically, right now, we do not have the first pillar at all. So you are actually conflicting yourselves. You hope to work in a multi-pillar approach. We are not saying that you should totally delete the MPF scheme or make it obsolete. You keep on saying that you want to enhance it. Well, if you say that you want to enhance it, that means you know that improvements can be made. We gave you such a good suggestion, even including the first pillar. And it can really resolve the political issues of today. We can work together. We can build a synergy to create a better harmonious society. as other academics have said, the government has enough reserves. We're still looking into fund contribution because we're not only resolving the economic issue, we also want to resolve the political and social issues in Hong Kong. The administration responded by saying that there are plenty of other improvements to be made in other areas. But we do have a very strong tool right now that can not only alleviate poverty and help with providing for the elderly. Why don't you even try to consider it? You're always conflicting yourselves. You talk about fund arrangements, but you know we do well in fund arrangements. Then you contradict yourself and talk about concept and principle, but you're not able to persuade us at all. So basically, you're just trying to move the goal around, and that's not going to work. Professor Young, please. Well, thank you. Well, I've attended many forums on universal retirement protection. Well, sometimes you talk about a retirement plan, sometimes you talk about alleviating poverty. If you think poverty alleviation is important, the retirement protection will not help you resolve it. To persuade the government to support the retirement plan, you have to look into some of the pension crises in other countries. Therefore, you have to look into the actual estimates to come up with a backup plan so that there would be no way for you to overcome pension crises in the future. So you have to look at the actual aerial numbers and estimates. So the government, you need to consider the sustainability and also to look in the actuarial estimates so that if you could think of a backup plan, you will be better support a universal retirement protection plan. Such a plan will be able to create a more harmonious society, just like it did in Germany. We see from many reports that conflicts would be created in all the different tiers in society. There would be some sort of conflicts amongst the different generations. So this is something you also need to consider. Thank you. Professor Poon, well, I have 3 points I'd like to raise. First of all, we need to pay attention to those who we see who did not work. They do not own an MPF scheme. And by 2047, we have to look into whether we could really carry this forward.
The
mainland has already implemented a retirement protection scheme, and so by 2047 there will be a big difference between us and the mainland. And the elderly people need to spend money on various things. We have this idea of a great hair market, but do we have the things they need? Mr. Siu Kwok-chung, well, this is the placard I prepared, that the promises will not be met, and they will keep moving the goalposts. You are so concerned about sustainability, and if you say that 2064, the proposal will have a sustainability problems. What about your higher OALA system? Is there going to be a sustainability problem. Mr. Matthew Chung said that there might be a problem, that there may be the need to increase taxes. So what kind of tax reform will be required? What taxes will be increased? So you use one yardstick to scrutinize the academics' proposal, but you are so relaxed and complacent about your own proposal. The academics have been asking about the reason why the 2064 is not accepted. Is it because of the question of concept, and you only help the needy and not everyone, or is it because of the lack of sustainability? The Secretary has said that the $50 billion will be spent on all these new initiatives, new enhancements for the future. Well, you can cover everything if this is the case, such as expenditure on keeping a better police force, or the operation of the post office. All such measures can be said to be helping our elderly population to cope in the future. Who decided to spend the $50 billion like this? When I announced that I would filibuster in the budget debate, I already said this. There's no way we can hold someone accountable for spending the $50 billion. We call this universal retirement protection. It's somewhat exaggerated. It's actually a universal annuity scheme, because in some other countries where they have this, an elderly person would get a sum of money when they reach a certain age. According to the academics, your proposals, the government's proposals, are not viable. We have had 2 financial crises since 1998. Just look at the wealth that vaporized. Now, instead of having I-banks, these countries are now themselves I-banks. If you check the accounts, these countries did not go bust because of their retirement protection system. It's because of their debt problem. They borrow money not to support the welfare or retirement protection system, but for speculation. Their financials secretary decided somehow that they should borrow money to speculate in London. Various people have written on this. There are a wealth of data to support this. People on wages are getting less and less compared with those rent seekers who get their wealth from speculation. Well, these economies were bankrupted not because of welfare, but because of the development of welfare. Members, any objection to extending the meeting to 11:30? Mr. Roy Kwong, yeah, your first round, but still it's 2 minutes only. But the government is hurting itself, and the government is offending 160 academics. In the world of martial arts, academics are those expert warriors. They have come up with a proposal. They've looked at the sustainability. And then the proposal is rejected without any reason offer. So we have been going round and round in a few years, and the $50 billion is used for something for the future. And then we have a lot of overspending projects, Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, White Elephant projects, and still our elderly population is not having a good life. You may argue that there are other welfare allowances, but the universal retirement protection is something basic. I've been a district councillor for many years in Yuen Long, and asked them to apply for OOA. If you're over 70, there's no means test. Well, they have spent half of their life creating the Hong Kong as it is, and now we want them to overcome various hurdles before you provide them with an allowance. Now you have taken advantage of the hard work of the 180 academics. Actually, in the government's team, you have people who used to be the students of these academics. I just one question: is the 2064 the proposal rejected? I want to give my 2 minutes to Mr. Wong Hong. I hope the public will understand a concept he has mentioned, and that is there's a moral hazard dimension in the higher OALA scheme. What is that, Professor Wong? Well, the moral hazard goes like this. If you want to get this allowance, you do something which is difficult to have certainty. The government wants to help the people in need, the needy people, depending on your asset or income. So how can you turn yourself into a needy person? You lower your income and your assets, which is legal. You give your assets to your son, and then you don't have that much in asset. This has happened in the life scheme. Some social workers have been asked whether a prospective claimant should transfer assets to his son. Well, for elderly people, they don't have income, so they would be able to satisfy the income test. But the government claims that you are better, your policy is better because you only help those in need, but that incurs a high moral hazard. The so-called elderly persons in need are really elderly persons who should have ease of mind in having a reasonable living standard. Instead of trying to pit one group of elderly people against another, and you only help the less fortunate group. If there's no means test, if it's universal, then the moral hazard will not be there. Correct. As Chairman, well, I also have questions, but I would like to allow members to ask theirs first. If you calculate the sums, well, we all have strong views. I won't repeat the arguments. First question: the wealth gap in Hong Kong is still big. Very obviously, the current tax system and the welfare programs we have cannot achieve the wealth redistribution effect that we want to see. If we have a universal retirement protection, will the wealth redistribution be achieved more effectively? And will it also at the same time address wealth alleviation concerns? A second question is also about the moral hazard, because there are means tests. Some applicants may have to redistribute or reassign the assets so as to be eligible. Has the government assessed the moral hazard resulting from this arrangement and also the implication for family relationship and also the implication of elderly people being taken care of by their children, and the peak of aging is coming. What can we do in preparation? And we should not forget that the current generation of elderly people might have accumulated some assets. And they can spend more money. The next generation of elderly people will have a lower chance of wealth accumulation before they age. And the lack of retirement protection will not just affect those in the year 2046, but also the next generations of elderly people. Secretary, your response.
I'll try to take these questions one by one. First of all, many of you have talked about the Universal Retirement Protection Scheme. Well, we believe that our principle wants to follow the multi-pillar approach suggested by the World Bank and to cater to the needs of the elderly. Therefore, I have emphasized that aside from providing basic assistance for those in dire need, we are going to arrange for 3 million to help to provide allowances for others, such as assistance in other areas. We understand the multi-pillar approach, but the World Bank recommends that the countries can decide on how many pillars to adopt based on individual situations. Many of you asked about the $50 billion fund. I have repeated many times that we want to help the elderly in need. Therefore, we have enhanced the OALA and also provided more medical assistance, which is in line with what the World Bank has suggested. We are not trying to enforce this at all. The government decided on informing the public in the policy address. Poverty alleviation and booklet on page 53 shows clearly that based on our calculations, on average, by 2046, then we will be using 13.3 billion per year. And that's already 1/5 as suggested by some academics. For the arrangement without a means test, of course, different studies would show different results. We have also based our estimates on study results by the Chinese University of Hong Kong, And looking at the results, we see that results are half and half. Half of them support universal retirement protection, half of it do not. So you can see that there are many differing results. We understand what Mr. Kwong has said, that there is huge controversy in the universal retirement protection scheme. Therefore, we have decided to conduct a review, and hence you see from our policy address that we have made concrete steps forward by pushing forward our funding scheme. We see that the elderly and this generation has a higher educational level than the previous generation, and with the maturity of the MPF, many of the elderly would have a more ideal package. Therefore, many of the elderly would see certain savings after retirement. The silver hair bonds or the public annuity funding, we would need to look into it. For the tax scheme and on how to accommodate to the different needs of society, this is something that the FS had mentioned, that they have set a working group to focus on tax schemes to create wealth and at the same time to work on tax schemes and benefits. We understand that with the means test, it would be risky, but we do have to find a balance to see whether a non-means test scheme could be feasible. In certain areas, we can shoulder responsibility, such as the medical vouchers. There is no means test for that voucher. We provide the old age allowance and also the $2 transportation concession fee. But of course, that would be different from arrangements made for after retirement. Therefore, we do need to strike a balance and to seek areas for improvement. We do not wish the scheme to be too much of a hassle for the elderly, and we hope that for the elderly who own savings, they wouldn't have to worry much about it. 40% of the elderly are receiving old age allowance. Perhaps I would respond to here for now. Thank you, members and deputations, for giving us your views, whether you support the government's arrangement or not. We're going to continue with the discussion on retirement protection scheme. I'd like to thank you all for attending today's meeting. Thank you.